about that. Now, here's a video I took at the end of a long banging day at Reef-a-Palooza Orlando with the saltwater sensei himself, Mr. Jack Kent from Continuum in Brightwell, giving you all some beginner saltwater advice and tips. Check it out.
This story starts when I was about 14 years old up in Findlay, Ohio, when I had a miserable attempt at a reef tank, and I was looking at a bottle and it said Kent on it, had like the pink and yellow label, and I thought someday it'd be cool to have my name on some fish tank stuff. And then 20 years later, I'm sitting next to the man, Jack Kent himself, who was the founder of Kent Marine, sold Kent Marine, and now has his own line, Continuum and Brightwell. And today, I am excited to be sharing some serious saltwater knowledge with you all, with Jack. Jack, say hello, how are you?
Hello folks, how are you?
Now, I want to give some background. How long have you been in the saltwater biz?
In business since 1989.
1989, okay. So, a lot of knowledge there. A lot of my, subscribers and people that watch this, there's the high level stuff, but I really always have those people that are like, they have the Planet tank and they're like, man, I'm jumping to the reef tank. I want to get into this. So I want to talk about saltwater aquarium beginner advice and kind of tips that we can talk about, and just to get people off on the right start, because you can always do more and you can always make it like harder and add more stuff and get things going. So I just want to like set the table with the beginning thing, and just first things first, can you give people some just basic advice on you're starting your first saltwater aquarium? What do you do first?
Okay, one of the problems with saltwater aquariums is that the dissolved oxygen content is so much lower than fresh water. So that really means that it's critical from the standpoint of ammonia removal. Problems that you typically don't have in freshwater become real problems in marine tanks. So the first thing you want to do is you want to have a marine aquarium that's as large as you can afford. The oceans are very stable and the fish are not able to take great swings in temperature and water chemistry. So the bigger aquarium you have will be much more stable. So you probably don't want to start off with a nano tank. You probably want to start off with something larger, minimum 55 gallons, and you probably want to go larger if you can. Even to start out, 90 gallons, 100 gallons, something like that. You'll have a much better success than if you try a very small aquarium. 10 gallons is out, 20 gallons is out, unless you have a nano tank that's actually made for the purpose and has built-in filtration.
Okay, and before you even buy your tank, like, what do you recommend before you buy any sort of saltwater stuff?
Get a book.
Get a book.
Go to websites, read everything you can read. Saltwater is a little different than freshwater. The same chemistry applies and things work the same way, but they're much more critical. And you really don't want to kill these beautiful animals. Many of them are still caught out of the oceans. We don't want to just bring them in and murder them. We really want to keep them in a good environment for a long period of time, give them a long, happy life.
Do you recommend people start with the freshwater tank if they want to get, if they've never had an aquarium at all? Do you recommend they start with the freshwater tank and then get a reef tank, or can you go straight into it?
Not necessarily. You can go straight into it, but I do recommend with a reef tank that you get a book, because you do want to read about the criticality of pH, alkalinity, ammonia levels, nitrate levels, tank cycling, use of bacteria. These are much more critical in a marine environment than they are in a freshwater environment.
Okay, so we've got our book, we've got our tank size. We're going to run, if we're going to run a small tank, we're going to run one with a built-in filtration. We want to make sure it's big, but we prefer bigger though. We want a bigger surface area, 55 minimum.
Right.
We go from that. Where do we go with filtration? How would you recommend someone filtering an aquarium? Because this is a different ball game, like you said. How would you recommend the filtration start for Johnny Beginner in the saltwater?
Well, you need to have a very good filtration medium, and Continuum has several of those. We'll talk about those probably in a later clip.
Sure.
And you need to start out with a good bacteria. We manufacture several different bacterias. In fresh water, you can typically start out without a bacteria and you can develop the bacteria. That can be done in a marine system, but you'll be much better off if you start out with bottle bacteria to get the system going in a proper way. There are a number of bacteria that operate in a marine environment, and it's better to do it the right way.
And let me ask you this on bacteria, because I have used my Lifeline phone a friend on bacteria before with you. But can you kind of lay out like a timetable, or just give people advice on time of setting up, like how long of time?
Well, a freshwater system, you can have it up and running and put sensitive fish in it pretty quickly. In a marine system, we recommend that you don't do that. Not to say that there aren't some products on the market to cycle a tank very rapidly, I recommend that you don't do that you take time. You're going to need at least 30 days before you put anything that has any sensitivity at all, and probably much longer, 2, 3, 4 months, before you go buy that $100 fish and put in there. Use just damsels and other really tough fish to begin with, or to cycle the tank with, and don't put anything inexpensive at first. You know, people want to go buy a powder blue tang or some other sensitive fish right at first because they're beautiful. But the problem is you're going to end up with a dead fish. You're going to be upset. Your wife's going to be mad at you. It's probably not a good road to walk.
It's easy to lose $100 real quick with saltwater.
That's right.
Freshwater takes a little more. You can do it, but it takes more work. Right. So do you have some advice for people as far as of those, I don't want to call them bulletproof fish. You mentioned damsels. What are some other fish that you would say, if you're a Johnny beginner in your first 6 months, what are some of the fish you would recommend?
Well, clownfish aren't bad. And of course, people love clownfish. They're beautiful. You can have an anemone in there and some clownfish. It's a good way to learn. They're not that expensive.
Sure.
And you know, you buy hardy fish. The store can help you pick out some hardier species of fish. You know, stay away from the angelfish and the butterflies and things of that nature.
Okay. And then this is something that I think a lot of people, myself included, have rushed in a saltwater tank. We've talked about what kind of fish. How many of these fish? I say Jack. Johnny Newcomer has a 55-gallon tank, so you can put 55 fish in, right? Like, so what? No. Give us like some framework to work within of a 55.
Particularly at first, you're going to want to put 3 or 4 fish in there maximum, and you don't want to add them all at once.
Okay, so break the timetable down on that.
That's right. So you know, try 2 fish to begin with, you know, and then over time you can add fish as the biological system matures. Then you can add more fish. But you know, the loading for a marine system is much less than for a freshwater system.
So a much lighter fish load.
Much lighter load, yes.
Now in the first month, are we adding 2 fish, 3 fish, 1 every 2 weeks? I mean, I know it's a feel, but I mean, would you?
Yeah,
is
well,
there a rough
you know,
guideline
if you're
for
cycling the tank and you're putting damsels 1 or 2, and that's all, and you may want to take the damsel out. You may not like them. You may want to take them back to the store. Then put in clownfish at some point. Put 2.
Okay.
And only have 2 for several months. And you don't want to start with corals. You want to start with fish. You want to keep the fish successfully and know that you understand how the system works before you progress to invertebrates, and particularly live corals.
Okay. I want to talk on 2 things that I think a lot of beginners, and this is coming from, I've killed a lot of fish, like that the beginners start off and do wrong. I want to talk about feeding, and then I want to talk about maintenance. So how often does one feed a saltwater tank in the beginning stages? I mean, we eat 3 times a day. I eat 5 times a day. How often do you feed?
Well, I only feed my fish once a day. And at first, when the tank is young, you want to feed even less.
Okay.
And of course, there's a big problem in putting too much food. So how much food are you going to add? So you want to just put what the fish will consume in a short period of time, particularly on a brand new tank.
Okay. Okay. So we have our food now. Let's talk about. I mean, these are just paintings, right? You can just set them and forget them, and they're good, right? So I'm kidding, but what do we want to do in the way of maintenance? And I'm gonna go on record as I'm Johnny huge water change in the freshwater setup. That's not the case, right? So can you give kind of some maintenance, water change, rough guidelines? Every tank is different, but what do you recommend as a system, as a routine for people in their beginning saltwater tank as far as water changes and maintenance?
Well, first of all, you need to learn the term partial water change.
Partial, okay.
You don't want to change all the water at once.
And what is partial?
Well, partial means you do a percentage of it. So I like to do 20% water change.
Okay.
Probably about once a month.
Once a month, okay.
Yes.
That's it, wow.
And so, you can do more than that, or you can do less than that, and you'll learn a routine over a period of time. I also recommend that you buy a good grade of salt. There are a lot of cheap salts on the market. It's kind of like coffee.
Sure.
If you buy cheap coffee, it tastes like crap. Same thing with the marine system. You buy cheap salt, you have problems.
Okay.
So salts have a number of criteria that are really important to them, and so a better salt will have much better results for you than a poor salt.
Okay. Wonderful, wonderful. And then our person has had their setup. They've been going for 2-3 months. They want to step over into corals. We're going to tread lightly here, and then we're going to wrap this up. What do you recommend in the way of starting off with corals? Any kind of corals that you're like, Johnny beginner should try this, or give me some examples of some corals and when to add them.
I would add some other kinds of invertebrates first.
Okay.
I'd prefer to add a couple of anemones first.
Nice.
See how they do. If they're doing well, then you might want to progress to corals at some point. But I'm talking about probably 6 months down the road before you really want to put corals in the system. I'm not saying you can't do it sooner, and if you're experienced, you might be able to do it sooner, but for the average beginner, I would wait about 6 months before I begin to start with corals. And I would start out with things like zoanthids first.
Okay.
And like I mentioned, anemones already, coralomorphans, Recordia, things of that nature are not as sensitive as hard corals.
Oh, nice.
Hard corals are much more difficult, and I think I'd save them for a little bit later. And particularly small polyp corals like Acropora are very difficult, and you need proper lighting, and there are a lot of things that you have to do for them. So we'll talk about those
In
a
another
later
time.
show. Yeah, but so I wouldn't start with those to begin with because they're too sensitive.
Thank you so much for dropping it.
Folks, I can't give you better advice on saltwater direct than with this man. So if you like what I'm doing, subscribe. Make it an awesome week. Drop me a note in the comments of what you think and what you want to know about saltwater, and tank on. Later.